It's just junk, old man. Nobody wants your war trash. That's what the warehouse clerk said as he hurled the dented helmet into a bin behind the loading bay. The man who brought it didn't speak, didn't fight. He just looked down and walked away. 3 hours later, a military convoy blocked the street, surrounded the building, and ordered a halt to all operations. Then a brigadier general stepped out and asked, "Who threw away Sergeant Whitman's helmet? If you believe memory wears steel, not rust, comment respect below." Samuel Whitman had lived through enough conflict to know when a battle wasn't worth fighting. At 81, the retired Army medic conserved his energy for the things that truly mattered. His modest apartment sat on the edge of Riverside's old industrial zone, where ancient warehouses were being systematically cleared to make way for luxury condominiums. The inevitable march of progress erasing history one building at a time. Each morning, Sam followed the same routine: coffee at dawn, a brief walk to keep his joints moving, and a careful check of his few remaining possessions from a life that spanned decades of service. Among these treasures, one stood apart: a rusted steel helmet, M1, issue at surface pitted and scratched by time and combat. A faded blood-type stencil remained visible, Opos, near the rim, a distinctive dent marked where a bullet had struck but not penetrated. This particular Tuesday, Sam had received a notice that the final warehouse from his old unit storage was being cleared. All unclaimed items will be disposed of within 72 hours. The form letter stated with bureaucratic indifference, though he had collected most of his belongings years ago, something compelled him to make one last visit. Perhaps it was simple closure, or perhaps something deeper. The warehouse stood like a tired sentinel at the end of Veterans Drive, its concrete facade weathered by decades of industrial grime. Sam approached the reception desk where a young clerk barely in his 20s scrolled mindlessly through his phone. "Excuse me," Sam said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age. "I received this notice. I was told this unit might still hold my locker from years back." The clerk glanced up, his gaze immediately falling on the helmet tucked under Sam's arm. "You looking to donate that?" Sam shook his head. "No, just preserve it, please. It might seem insignificant to you, but..." "Right." The clerk interrupted, a smirk forming. "Grandpa's battle hat. We'll give it a museum seat." He reached for it, turning it over in his hands with casual disregard. "Not much of a donation, though. Military surplus shops have dozens of these. They sell them to reenactment guys. This one is different," Sam began, but the clerk had already lost interest. "Look, old man, we're clearing everything out. If you're not donating something valuable, I've got actual work to do." He tossed the helmet into a nearby metal bin, labeled scrap, the steel making a hollow sound as it landed among discarded machine parts. "It's just junk," the clerk added, turning away. "Nobody wants your war trash." Sam stood motionless, his weathered hands suddenly empty. Decades of military discipline kept his face neutral, but something in his eyes dimmed. A flicker of resignation that had nothing to do with the helmet itself and everything to do with what it represented. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Behind him, laughter floated from the reception desk, the clerk already relaying the encounter to a coworker. "Can you believe these old guys think every piece of junk they dragged home from Nam belongs in the Smithsonian?" The heavy door swung shut behind Sam, cutting off the sound of their amusement. Throughout the morning, the helmet sat in the scrap bin, partially buried beneath fan motors, lengths of cable, and other industrial detritus deemed worthless in the new economy. Occasionally, warehouse employees would notice it, some adding their own commentary to the clerk's dismissal. "Think it was actually in combat, or just some parade piece?" asked a forklift operator during his break. "Probably bought it at an army surplus store to impress his grandkids," replied a supervisor. "Half these old-timers exaggerate everything. My uncle claims he was special forces, but he was just a cook. Might have been used in Call of Duty," joked another, triggering a round of laughter. Unknown to them, Miguel Ramirez, the night janitor who worked the early morning shift, had observed the interaction from his cleaning station. A former Marine with 2 tours in Afghanistan, he recognized something in the old man's bearing. The quiet dignity that came not from seeking recognition, but from having seen enough to know what truly deserved it. Once the others had returned to work, Miguel approached the bin. He carefully lifted the helmet, noting the dent that couldn't have been made by anything except a bullet, the faded blood type, the unit markings barely visible under years of wear. This was no reproduction, no surplus store replica. Silently, Miguel pulled out his phone and took several photos, close-ups of the distinctive markings and damage pattern. Without comment, he sent them to a group chat titled "Second Recon Ghosts," fellow veterans who understood the significance of such artifacts. By noon, the warehouse had moved on to other matters. The morning's encounter with the old veteran was already forgotten, reduced to a brief anecdote shared over lunch breaks. The scrap bin containing the helmet had been moved to the loading bay, awaiting transfer to the industrial compactor that would crush its contents into a dense cube of metal destined for recycling. At 2:17 p.m., a junk removal crew arrived to process the day's accumulated scrap. They were halfway through loading bins onto their truck when the first Humvee appeared at the warehouse gate. It was followed by 3 more, standard military transport vehicles with no special markings beyond their olive drab exteriors. Behind them rolled a black SUV with government plates and a small American flag mounted on the antenna. A final Humvee brought up the rear, completing a formation that suggested not a casual visit, but a mission. The security guard at the gate, unaccustomed to military visitors, approached the lead vehicle with visible confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, notebook in hand to record the unexpected visitors. The window rolled down to reveal a uniformed soldier. "Please stand aside, military operation in progress." Before the guard could respond, the convoy pushed forward, vehicles positioning themselves strategically around the loading bay. Warehouse operations ground to a halt, as employees stopped to stare at the sudden military presence. From the black SUV emerged a figure of unmistakable authority, a brigadier general in full dress uniform, stars gleaming on his shoulders. He stood for a moment surveying the scene with the calculated assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating tactical situations. Behind him, 8 soldiers deployed with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter around the loading area. Their movements were calm but purposeful, not threatening but clearly not to be questioned. The general approached the now nervous warehouse manager who had hurried outside at the commotion. "Sir," the manager began, "there must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," the general interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority that needed no volume for emphasis. "I have orders to recover a piece of military equipment improperly disposed of on these premises." He handed over a printed document bearing official seals and signatures. "What is this about?" the manager asked, scanning the document with a growing confusion. "A helmet," the general replied, "with blood, with history, and with a name that outranks everyone in this building." The clerk who had dismissed him earlier pushed forward his earlier confidence, notably diminished. "A helmet? You mean the old thing from this morning? It's just surplus. It is not just anything." The general cut him off. "That helmet belongs to Sergeant Samuel Whitman, Combat Medic, 5th Special Forces Group. It's been designated for preservation by direct order of the Joint Chiefs." A hush fell over the gathered employees. "Locate it," the general continued. Immediately, the clerk stammered. "It was in the scrap bin, headed for recycling." For the first time, the general's composed expression faltered, revealing a flash of something between anger and grief. "Then I suggest you find it now. If you believe forgotten gear still carries weight, comment respect below." Miguel Ramirez stepped forward from the back of the crowd. "Sir," he addressed the general with the instinctive respect of one serviceman to another, "I can show you where it is." The general's gaze shifted immediately, recognizing a fellow veteran in Miguel's bearing. "Lead the way, Marine." Miguel nodded, unsurprised the officer had identified his branch of service without being told, and guided the small procession toward the compactor area. The scrap bin that had contained the helmet now sat in line for processing, just minutes away from being emptied into the crushing mechanism. "There," Miguel pointed. "That bin was moved here about 20 minutes ago." 2 soldiers immediately approached, carefully shifting through the metal debris, until one called out, "Found it." "Sir." The helmet emerged from the scrap, its dull surface catching the afternoon light. With gloved hands, a female soldier gently lifted it, brushing away clinging dirt, and examining it for new damage. Finding none, she carried it to a padded case another soldier had retrieved from one of the Humvees. As she placed it inside, she executed a precise salute, not to her superior officers, but to the helmet itself. The gesture wasn't lost on the warehouse employees who watched in growing bewilderment. The general approached the case, looking down at the helmet for a long moment before addressing the gathered crowd. "This helmet," he began, his voice carrying easily across the now silent loading bay, "stayed on during a mortar strike in Da Nang, 1969. 3 soldiers came home because of what happened that day. I was one of them." He closed the case with a gentle click. "Sergeant Whitman was our medic. When the shells started falling, he ran toward the wounded, not away. This helmet took shrapnel that would have killed him instantly. Despite his own injuries, he continued treating casualties for 17 hours straight." The warehouse staff stood transfixed, the earlier mockery forgotten, as history materialized before them. The clerk who had tossed the helmet stepped forward, his face pale. "I didn't know," he stammered. The general's gaze was not unkind, but unwavering. "You didn't ask." He turned to his aide. "Secure the artifact for transport to the memorial." As soldiers prepared to depart, another officer approached the warehouse manager with a rolled document and a folded American flag. Sir, by order of the Veterans Preservation Act, this location has been designated a historical recovery site. Within minutes, that flag was raised on the previously empty pole at the entrance to the loading dock. Beneath it, soldiers mounted a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of what was nearly lost." No further explanation was offered, none was needed. The convoy departed as precisely as it had arrived, i.e. leaving behind a transformed warehouse. Employees who had laughed at the old man's junk now stood in uncomfortable silence, confronted with the consequences of casual disrespect. By evening, the story had spread throughout Riverside's veteran community. Samuel Whitman, who had returned to his quiet apartment after the morning's dismissal, received an unexpected visitor, a young soldier in dress uniform, who presented him with a folded flag and a handwritten note from the general himself. "Sir, your helmet now rests where stories begin, not end. With enduring respect, Brigadier General James Harrison, once a frightened private, whose life you saved." Sam accepted both with the same quiet dignity he had shown when walking away hours earlier. No vindication crossed his features, no satisfaction at justice served, only a slight nod, the silent acknowledgement, between those who understand that some values need no audience to remain true. "Will you tell him something for me?" Sam asked the young messenger. "Of course, tell him I remember, all of them, every face, every name." Sam's weathered hand rested on the folded flag. "That's why I kept it, not for what it protected, but for who." That night across town, the clerk who had so casually discarded history sat alone in his apartment, researching the 5th Special Forces Group, the Battle of Da Nang, and a combat medic named Samuel Whitman, who had received the Silver Star for valor under fire, a medal he had never mentioned during their brief encounter. The young man's social media post from that evening was simple but profound. "Today, I learned the difference between an object and an artifact. One holds material, the other holds memory." Sam never returned to the warehouse. He had no reason to. What mattered had been recovered, and what didn't matter, the small indignities, the casual disrespect, he had long ago learned to release like so many other burdens carried home from war. 2 weeks later, without fanfare or publicity, the National Veterans Memorial Museum opened a new exhibit, titled simply, "Steel That Shielded." At its center stood Sam's helmet, meticulously preserved and displayed beneath a powerful photograph. A young medic kneeling beside a wounded soldier in 1969, his helmet clearly showing the same distinctive dent that had saved his life. Visitors paused before the display, reading the simple plaque that offered no judgment, only truth. "Rescued by silence, preserved by action." Sergeant Samuel Whitman, combat medic, treated 63 wounded men during the Battle of Da Nang 1969. 3 became generals, 7 became doctors, all became fathers. Miguel Ramirez, whose quiet intervention had triggered the helmet's recovery, found himself unexpectedly elevated within the warehouse hierarchy. When the company owner learned of his role and his military background, he was offered a supervisor position and additional responsibility, leading monthly history sessions for warehouse workers. The series, unofficially titled "What the Thing Meant," brought in various artifacts from local veterans, teaching employees to recognize the difference between objects that carried only financial value and those that carried historical weight. Perhaps most surprising was the transformation of Ethan Parker, the clerk who had thrown the helmet away. The experience had shaken something loose in him: assumptions, prejudices, the casual disregard of youth for anything that preceded it. 3 months after the incident, he applied for a position at the local Veterans Affairs office. "It changed me," he wrote in his application letter. "I want to know better and do better." Sam continued his quiet life, his daily walk, taking him past the industrial zone, where memory had nearly been compacted into oblivion. He never mentioned the incident to his few friends, never sought recognition for his service beyond the private acknowledgement of those who had shared it. One morning as he passed a school bus stop, a young boy of perhaps 10 looked up from his history textbook. Recognition flickered across his face. He had visited the museum exhibit with his class the previous week. Without prompting, he stood and offered a solemn salute. Sam stopped momentarily surprised, then nodded in acknowledgement. "That salute," he said quietly, "means more than you know." The boy lowered his hand. "My teacher says you save people." "We all did," Sam replied. "That's what the helmet was for." He continued his walk, hands in his pockets, eyes straight ahead. A man who had never needed external validation for internal valor. Behind him, the boy watched until he disappeared around the corner, then opened his notebook and wrote, "Memory doesn't need polish to shine. Subscribe to Steelheart Stories. If you believe memory doesn't rust, it resonates."